We're sure you see a lot of people who drink and use other drugs, legal and illegal. This program isn't here to tell you how to live your life.
However, we are here to let you know about some science and let you make the decisions. While some of the following material is addressed to those under the age of 25, please remember people of any age can damage their brains with alcohol and other drugs.
Addressing younger people is especially important, though, because if you're under 25, your brain is still developing. Although you're an adult in many ways, biologically and developmentally, your brain is very different from adults over 25.
This comes with serious implications. Because your brain is still developing some of its most important parts, the decisions you make right now will affect the functioning of your brain. For how long? Only the rest of your life.
Using alcohol and other drugs could stop your brain from developing like it's supposed to.
Without getting into sciencey jargon about things like neurotransmitters, you need to know scientific testing on animals and humans can teach us a lot.
For instance, when it comes to alcohol, the chemicals roaming around in your developing brain will make you feel less intoxicated than an adult who drinks the same amount, meaning you won't feel as tired and you won't feel as drunk.
Sounds great, right? If you don't feel as drunk, you can drink more. But here's the problem. Just because you don't feel as drunk doesn't mean that you aren't as drunk.
It just means that you don't feel it, which actually makes younger people more likely to drink to excess, which still affects brain development. And that puts us at risk of permanent brain damage.
Let's start our look into alcohol and brain damage with your prefrontal lobe, which is the part of your brain that deals with little things like making decisions, judgment, controlling your impulses, and language use. Only the most important functions for the rest of your life.
Developing brains that are also exposed to high doses of alcohol show damaged prefrontal lobes, including less white matter, the stuff that helps shoot signals around your brain.
There's also a chemical in your brain called myelin, which is the grease that allows signals to move around fast on your brain's pathways. Binge drinking is shown to reduce the amount of myelin, slowing down the signals in your brain. There's evidence that these damaging effects continue into your adult life.
The next major part of your developing brain that alcohol can damage is your hippocampus, which is needed for memory and learning, things that might be relevant to someone in college, or anyone who wants to work in law, medicine, education, business. You get the idea.
Well, heavy alcohol use can act like a toxin to your developing hippocampus, and heavy and extended use of alcohol is associated with a 10% reduction in the size of the hippocampus.
Because your brain is still developing if you're under 25, alcohol will have a greater negative impact on the transmission of memory into your hippocampus.
Remember, since you're less likely to feel alcohol's effects, you're more likely to drink more, which can create serious blockages to your hippocampus. This is an alcohol blackout.
The night that I was expelled from college, I was incredibly drunk, like to the point of vaguely remembering it. Honestly, I was just waiting for an elevator to come. I guess I was bored or just in a drunken stupor, and I started a fire on the a poster board, and I threw a piece of paper in the trash can and kind of inadvertently started firing a trash can, and the fire alarms went off. Everyone was told to leave the dorms, and the next morning I was told that I would have to leave the dorms, and eventually it was decided that I would no longer be able to attend school.
A blackout doesn't mean you pass out. It means you actually remain conscious but will have little or no memory of what happened once you're sober.
In other words, while fully adult brains that become intoxicated send signals to stop drinking, which prevents drinking to the point of a blackout, our developing brains don't get the same impact from alcohol. So we keep drinking, and then we black out.
In one study, 51% of undergrads who drank said that they'd experienced blackout, and many reported learning that they'd engaged in vandalism, unprotected sex, driving, and uncontrolled spending.
In fact, a study was done that compared binge drinkers against non-binge drinkers. And the binge drinkers performed worse on memory, motor function, spatial memory, and pattern recognition.
The more you soak your developing brain in alcohol, the more it potentially impacts your brain function permanently as an adult.
As if all that wasn't bad enough, there's evidence that for developing brains, alcohol dependency can be more likely than for adult brains.
Why? Because the way alcohol impacts your brain chemicals, including dopamine, the feel-good chemical, and the way it potentially hurts the growth of your prefrontal cortex, which controls your decisions and impulses, makes you more likely to become dependent on it.
But alcohol isn't the only substance that puts your brain development at risk. The brains of marijuana users show atypical neural profiles, which is a fancy way of saying their brains are structured differently than non-users' brains. And in this case, differently isn't better.
Weed users' brains show odd structures where the brain tries to develop normal functions in compensation for parts that aren't working right because of marijuana use.
And weed users' brains show less functional white matter, which is the brain's communication system. These brain development problems result in very real effects.
Compared to non-users, weed users have poorer memories, are worse at language acquisition, and have less control over their thinking.
Users are more likely to suffer depression, and even a month after abstaining from use, still perform relatively poorly on attention, memory, planning, and coordination tests.
But what about other drugs like heroin, ecstasy, cocaine, inhalants, and meth? In varying ways, but to significant degrees, they all do similar kinds of damage to your brain.
Typically, they impact those parts of your brain, including the prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, amygdala, cerebellum, and your white matter that are heavily involved in thinking.
And they've been shown to affect your working memory, your ability to make decisions, and your ability to control your impulses, among other things.
What about taking prescription drugs when they're not prescribed, or in different doses than how they are prescribed? Prescription drugs, if abused off prescription, are no better than illegal drugs, weed, or alcohol.
These drugs are meant to compensate for very specific needs within the body and are carefully measured. They can be just as powerful as illegal drugs, and taking them without prescription can be just as dangerous to a developing brain.
So let's review. The key points here are that if you're under 25, your brain is still forming. And even if you're over 25, alcohol and other drugs can really damage your brain.
If your brain's still forming, using drugs, including alcohol, prevents it from developing like it's supposed to. Your decisions about drugs now may impact your ability to think for the rest of your life.
We're not here to tell you alcohol and drugs are just wrong. And you already know what's legal and what's not.
But should you make decisions on what to do without fully understanding how it can impact your brain? Not anymore.